Welcome to the Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by Bender Bending Rodriguez and his shiny metal ass. Let's dim the lights. And Bender, dim your shiny metal ass.
Welcome everybody to the Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by Skybank, the elite bank for millionaires only, or we will call the cops for some reason. Skybank. That one is so inside.
That's the best. That's awesome. And nobody has any idea what the hell we're talking about. Oh, it's so good.
Isn't that just the most insane thing? A bank calling the cops because they don't like a person in the lobby?
Oh my god. Oh god, I just love it. Don't explain it. Don't explain it. Nobody will know what we're talking about. And they don't need to. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
Welcome everybody to the Pestle. I am Wes.
And I am Todd.
And
I'm Alex.
He's Alex. I'm Billy.
We're just gonna have a moment for ourselves, everybody.
This is the us moment. We are filmmakers. I've been a full-time writer, director for about a decade now. And we use that kind of inside knowledge of how to make things, how to, create something. My brain is scrambled eggs right now.
Okay.
Todd is used to never knowing where the hell these sponsors are coming from.
Yeah, this is so good. Oh man!
And so we use all that to analyze films and see what they're made of. That's why we're called the Pestle. We're like a mortar and pestle, like in your kitchen. Well, probably not in anyone's kitchen in 2023, but we use that kind of thought to talk about films and shows. What film or show are we talking about today, comrade?
The show today we are talking about is the limited miniseries on Max called Chernobyl. So if you haven't seen this series, please pause the episode. Or if you weren't alive in 1986, please pause the episode, go watch it. I guess we're going to spoil some stuff. I mean, yeah, I think we would, because the first time I saw it, I just didn't realize 90% of it. So yeah, so we will spoil a lot, but we'll reveal a lot too, I think. So just pause the episode, go watch it. It is only 5 episodes long. They're about an hour long each, but a little bit more, but well worth it. Well worth it.
We'll look at, I'll see if I can cut myself off after a certain point, because so many notes, too many notes. And so we'll look at like some of the cinematography, lens flares, stabilizing a shot, and the effect it can have on the viewer. We'll look at story and writing, horror, tragedy, tension, threats, and other such stuff and things and stuff.
And a quick synopsis of the show. In April 1986, an explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the USSR becomes one of the world's worst man-made catastrophes. It's created and written by Craig Mazin, cinematography by Jakob Ihre. It's featuring Jared Harris as Valery Legasov, Stellan Skarsgard as Boris Shcherbina, Jessie Buckley as Lyudmilla, the pregnant wife, Emily Watson as Ulana, the nuclear physicist, Barry Keoghan as Pavel, the animal control kid, and Paul Ritter as Anatoly Dyatlov.
When the lava enters these tanks, it will instantly superheat and vaporize approximately 7,000 cubic meters of water, causing a significant thermal explosion.
How significant?
We estimate between 2 and 4 megatons. Everything within a 30-kilometer radius will be completely destroyed, including the 3 remaining reactors at Chernobyl. The entirety of the radioactive material in all of the cores will be ejected at force and dispersed by a massive shockwave, which will extend approximately 200 kilometers and likely be fatal to the entire population of Kiev, as well as a portion of Minsk. The release of radiation will be severe and will impact all of Soviet Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarusia, as well as Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and most of East Germany.
What do you mean, impact?
For much of the area, a nearly permanent disruption of the food and water supply. Steep increase in the rates of cancer and birth defects. I don't know how many deaths there will be, but many. For Belarusia and the Ukraine, impact means completely uninhabitable for a minimum of 100 years.
There are more than 50 million people living in Belarusia and Ukraine.
60, yes.
And how long before this happens?
Approximately 48 to 72 hours.
Good news all around.
Oh, hell.
We have a problem, but there's time. So
Time, not much, but there is some.
So this, oh my God, that scene, I don't know, I want to call it out right after watching it with you, but that whole scene is so brutal. And that chunk in particular really sets the stakes. But visually, there's something interesting that kind of happens in there, which is the scene is almost entirely handheld shots, or at least guys probably handheld sitting on some kind of dolly so that they can tilt and move around and slide a little bit left and right. And so it's all handheld. It's very shaky. But as Gorbachev, she says what she says, and he's processing, and then he's asking, Legasov, what that really means. What kind of impact are we talking? He starts talking about, mass hysteria. Like, this is worst case possible imaginable. And then we cut finally after hearing all that, and we're getting reaction shots around the room, right? And seeing everyone being like, oh God, like, and trying to act like they're not thinking, oh God. And then we finally cut back to Gorbachev, and we've gone from handheld all around this entire time to suddenly, as he's digesting and processing this analysis, they stabilize that shot, his reaction shot right there, stabilized. And suddenly it looks like his head is swimming. It's floating or kind of detached with anxiety. That's a beautiful, very, very subtle visual touch, because the difference between those handheld shots and that stabilized shot isn't much. But whenever you're establishing that language so well, and then suddenly, everything is a little bit smoother and you're just kind of floating around, you can feel his anxiety start to swim around with him. It's just little flourishes like that, man, drive me nuts. Like, it's so inspired. Those little moments like that are so inspired. So Comrade Todd, I'm curious what you remember from being a kid and this happening. Like, were you aware as it was happening, or was it like years later that you're like, oh crap, or anything at all? I don't know. And then watching it and experiencing it in this way, that's different. That's a completely different experience than what we saw.
Yeah, I mean, I was 6 when it happened. So when it happened, I didn't know, I didn't know whatever. If I knew anything, it was just that there was an accident, like an explosion. But that doesn't mean anything to somebody on the other side of the world, especially the type of explosion. And then when I got older, I'd heard of it. I knew that it was something. It was like just a name, like a famous name, but I didn't know anything about it still until I watched the series. I didn't have any idea that it was still an issue, that it was still a place, like basically like a, still off limits to people and everything. So the first time I watched it, it became pretty quickly my favorite series, like ever. It was just, I think there's something about it being actually something that exists now and something that actually happened that I almost feel like responsible to pay attention, because so many people died and suffered and are still suffering, I think. So, yeah, but as the show goes, I mean, that's such a great scene. And the guy who plays Gorbachev, I don't know who he is, but my God, there's that moment where he kind of starts to put his hands together and doesn't, and then collects himself for a second and then asks another question. That little moment says everything. I mean, this is the guy, right? He's like the top guy, and he's supposed to have it all together. And the only moment when you feel like he doesn't is that moment where he's just like, I really don't know what to do. What do I do with my hands? You know? And so it was great acting. And then, let me see, whatever. Stellan Skarsgard, like,
he needs like a lifetime achievement award already. I know he's still kind of young for it, but I think he's earned it. That guy.
Right? I mean, I can't even put into words like how the multiple layers that you get from not just him, I would say, but like Jared Harris and like everybody is just incredible. And the way that he delivers he's very matter of fact in how he delivers what's going to happen in that scene specifically. You know, when Gorbachev says there's 50 million people, 60 actually, like, whoa, you know, just very matter of fact, like this is going to happen. And he could have delivered it a lot more somber, you know, or a lot more aggressive, like do something. We need to do something now. But he was just very stoic and which I would imagine you'd have to be in the USSR at that time in front of Gorbachev, very respectful, and you just have to be. But anyway, the way that this was, the whole thing was told was just brilliant. And then in the end, they tell you a lot about it, you know, at the end of that last episode that Jessie Buckley, is it? No, it's Emily Watson's character is supposed to represent the people. I thought how brilliant, you know, everybody else is like a character, like was a part of this and did a lot of these things. I'm sure some of it was, you know, I'm sure some of it was for the show, but a lot of these things really did happen. But to add someone who is the voice of the people, who won't quit trying to find trying to bring people to justice, to convince Legasov to tell the truth, and at the hearing, and to have that is such a wonderful way to honor the people that have either died or just suffered or gone through this, you know, or at least even who have just been displaced. What a wonderful touch there. I thought that the way that they showed the radiation poisoning was some of the most brutal makeup design I've ever seen. Right? There was not an ounce of me that didn't believe that was real.
Yeah.
Every fight, right?
I'm looking away every single time. I'm like, I can't look at these people. I know it's makeup. I know this is the stuff that doesn't really bother me. Like makeup, visual effects. I'm like, it's fine. Let me see heads exploding all day. It's whatever, hilarious or whatever. I can't watch surgeries. That's me. I really can't watch like surgeries and medical stuff. That gets to me. Yeah. Chop off an arm with the chainsaw, you know, cool, you know, hilarious or whatever, like more blood, you know, and this, because it's based on reality, and because like you're saying, the makeup work is so unbelievable. It probably is the best I've ever seen too. God. Yeah.
It was painfully brutal. And the wife refusing to not be near her husband, that was brutal too, knowing she was pregnant, him putting his hand on her belt, like all of this, they had no idea, you know, they didn't know. And it's so brutal. And then I remember after I watched it the first time back when it came out, I went and did research about it just because I was like, I wanted to know more, like, is this what's happening now, you know? And they recently built a new structure, and they had to build it off site and then roll it onto the actual
Oh wow.
Over the actual site. And there's, video and pictures of it online, and it's just amazing. For like hundreds of years, it's going to be uninhabited. And I was talking to my neighbor about it actually, and he said, it's funny, I used to work on a show where it was like a wilderness show, and so we had to like do a bunch of research and stuff about like places. And it's interesting because in that area in Chernobyl, there's no people.
Mm-hmm.
So because there's no people, the landscape is very lush.
Yeah.
And the animals they run the place. Obviously, it's like Eden. It's like a Garden of Eden. Now, some of them, are doing better than others, right? With the radiation, but because humans aren't messing with the area, it's like just this kind of like an Eden,
It's like a preserve almost.
Exactly, like a preserve, which is almost hilarious, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, the acting is incredible. The writing is otherworldly, and it takes you on a journey, and the whole time you're just trying to understand what could have gone wrong, and they slowly reveal it, a little bit here, a little bit there, but not too much, and they just show you agony after agony, and then at the end they give you everything you need to know, and they do it in such a way where you actually understand it. And hate the people who made it happen, hate the situation that made it happen. So yeah, absolutely timeless.
Yeah.
I could watch it again right now, even though it's so brutal.
Same. That was the kind of crazy part, is because I watched this twice this week. I think I watched it on Tuesday and Wednesday, and then finally forced myself to start rewatching it again last night, and finished it this morning right before, recording. And once you hit play, you're in. Like, you really don't want to look away. It's just so engrossing. And for me, this hits on so many things that I'm passionate about and that I love, which is just kind of strange to find in like a show like this. The science aspect, as we both are like super nerds and really love learning and hearing, these discussions and these conversations. And so that whole aspect of not just hearing about the science, but also seeing it described and broken down to people who don't understand in ways that they can, which is really convenient devising for your audience, right? Because on the one hand, those characters really do need to know that conversation really does need to happen, but you also need to educate the audience so that we can be aware of the stakes and what's going on as well. So that's like a most perfect situation for a writer to find themselves in, of like, because that exposition is always the hardest thing to do anyway. But whenever it's literally built into the story, now you can be as dumbed down as you possibly want, because it benefits everyone. It benefits the story and it benefits the audience. And so that's just a really kind of magical element of this, of telling the story. And it also gets into, the search for truth. And I'm big on that. I'm really big on like journalism stories. And there's this kind of undertow of journalistic integrity happening as Ulana is trying to figure out what really happened, and she's carrying out her own investigation. And then, there's that moment, of course, where they need to decide, now that we know the truth, do we tell the truth? And then that gets to the other part that I really love, which is speaking truth to power. Good journalism is all about speaking truth to power. It's not about digging up, some low grade, indefensible person, to carry out a witch hunt and make yourself feel good. It's about actually toppling power structures, or holding them accountable, whichever works best. If you can't be held accountable, then maybe you should be toppled to some degree or another. And this is all about that. This is all about finding integrity in a system that really discourages it. And that's a human universal truth too. I think we all feel that. I'm sure there's not a soul in Russia who doesn't connect with that. And how many American stories have we seen about government cover-ups and whistleblowing? And I love all those too. And so this is kind of combining all those elements into one. And then of course, just the people who are paying the real cost are the ones who actually come together and the ones who actually care, which is again, another reflection of reality. You have people at the top who often don't really care about what happens underneath. In this case, it's a little give and take. Some of that is true. Some of it's not. You never got the sense from Gorbachev that he didn't care. You never got the sense from Boris that he didn't care. But of course, the people who didn't care were the people who were responsible for Chernobyl in the first place.
Right.
And so it's just this beautiful tangled web of humanity woven throughout this entire 5-episode, story. And it's hard for me to look away because any given moment is going to be compelling to me for all of those reasons. I was smitten. Same. I don't know if you waited until it was all out before you finally got to it. For me, I was watching it week by week. And so there's that moment at the end of episode 2, right, where they go into the underneath the reactor or whatever, and the lights cut out, and now you got to wait a week. And that was rough.
Oh, so rough.
For years now, I've had this curiosity about when the power gets low, does the battery indicator turn red or does it just turn off? Little status update. It does not turn red. It just turns off.
It just turns off. Noted. Got it.
So we are back. Sorry. There was a power shortage apparently.
No explosion though,
No
right?
explosion, just a dead battery.
All right.
Yeah.
The end of episode 2.
End of episode 2 hits. And those lights go out, the Geiger counter is going off or whatever.
Oh my God, so stressful.
The decimeter, and it's just perfectly stressful. Yeah. And then waiting to see what happens next. That was definitely one of those moments where you're like, I need to talk to someone about this. Because
well, it is also a great, a great way of showing how information is dispersed in real time. So you have the people that are experiencing it. You have the people who are outside fighting it, who don't really know what's going on. You have the people watching from the bridge who have even less idea what's going on. And then you have these upper management people who also don't know what's going on because they're being told information that is not accurate, because the people that should know can't believe what they're being told. So it's all of these different points of view that don't know at all what's going on. Nobody knows that at least, first episode or whatever, nobody knows that the reactors actually exploded except for maybe like a couple of people. And then nobody believes them. And then it takes forever for anyone else to believe that the reactor actually exploded. Like forever. And you're just sitting here. Why can't you just believe this person who said that I saw an open reactor? Like, why would they say otherwise? But it's just, it's like an incredible story of way to show, people, multiple points of view with multiple pieces of information, and understanding that why those people would stand on the bridge. They don't know that it's exploded, that it's like the reactor is exploded. They just think it's a fire, like the people fighting the fire, they don't know that it's the reactor. They just think it's a fire, and that's what they're doing. It's their job. So anyway. That's
kind of one of the beautiful things is like every single moment of like ignorance or hubris is fraught with what we already know about radiation that they don't, right? That's the dramatic irony that, the Craig Mazin was able to really take advantage of, is what we know versus what our characters know. And that's just a beautiful execution, right? The bridge scene that you're talking about, right? With like the nuclear ash kind of look. I don't know what was actually going on there, but that's what it made me think is nuclear fallout. And it's just horrifying, right? We have all this creeping dread and horror constantly through this show, especially those first couple episodes. Right. the ignorance and willful denials coming from everyone. Like the ignorance of there's that moment in the Chernobyl doctor's office, right? Where there's that exchange between, I don't know if there were two doctors or a nurse and a doctor, but she's asking him, she sees the explosion. She's like, where do we keep our iodine pills? He's like, we don't need iodine. Why would we need iodine pills? And the reaction on her face of just like, oh my God. Like she is completely confounded at his ignorance. And we all generally understand iodine helps, reduce radiation risk and negates it, or however exactly that operates. I don't know, clearly. And it's just a beautiful use of dramatic irony running throughout the show. And then some cases it's, just setting up and like, tension is here for you, and it helps whenever you set it up beforehand instead of waiting till after. And so you have that moment in episode whatever it was, 4, where they're discussing how to get the debris off the roofs. And what does Legasov say? Under no circumstances can a man go up on that roof. We're making it very clear. You don't do this. That's a hard line in the sand. And of course, it sets up so much tension so that when we do finally start sending guys up there, we understand this is worst case possible. Like we tried to avoid this, and these guys are going to pay the cost now. And same thing when they're taking off like the radiated clothes from the firefighters. There's that brief moment before she starts doing it. She declares their clothes are contaminated, right? They're radiated. And then she starts ripping it off with her bare hands. And there's so much tension as we're now watching her do the thing, because they set that up really nicely. And earlier in the film where that guy picks up the graphite off the ground. And so now we've seen what happens when you hold radiation in your hand. And now we're watching her do another version of it. And all you can do is just tense and try your best to not look away.
And not only do we see that, but later we hear them say what that was the equivalent of.
Ooh.
At one point someone says, oh, it's the equivalent of, I don't know, 400 x-rays. He's like, no, it's the equivalent of 4 million x-rays. Oh, I mean, yeah, that's okay. So
that's a lot of x-raying.
There's a lot of x-ray. Yeah.
And then, of course, she dumps the clothes in the basement, and then we look at her hand, and it's calling right back to the graphite guy, as you will now forever be known. And it's just it's so bad. The other thing they do really well is analogies. They're just constantly throwing out analogies, and that's to help us understand, right? And as he's trying to explain to like Gorbachev and everyone, and what does he say? Like bullets. Radiation is like bullets, and they're just shooting, and nothing stops them. Not concrete, not steel, not your body, right? They're just going to keep going. Now you have a very visceral understanding of what happens whenever you're dealing with this stuff. You're getting shot with millions and billions of bullets at the same time. Same thing with like the lava analogy that he uses as the core is melting down now. And it's just helping to deconstruct these really complex topics, but also creates a very visual way for encountering these moments. So as these things are happening, we very clearly have these guys underneath this thing or sitting underneath lava that's trying to get down to them. That's easy to hold in your head. We don't need a lot. Just beautiful. Like the equivalent of 2 Hiroshima bombs every hour after hour, 24 hours a day. We've had 20 hours so far, so that's 40 bombs. Tomorrow there will be another 24 hours. That's 48 bombs. And day after day, month after month, and it won't begin to stop for 100 years. It's like, oh. And then you'll see the continent itself will be killed. Like, okay, so you're saying we should take this serious. But the nice thing of hearing something like that is afterwards, every time they show the clock on the screen of how many hours have elapsed, we can double that. And it's just dread. We start to feel viscerally like every moment that passes that this thing isn't fixed is death. And it's just beautiful setups. And yeah, I don't know. I'll come back to that later, I guess. But and Lyudmilla, Lyudmilla. How were you saying that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Lyudmilla, she's like, the interactions between her and her husband breathes in like this personal side of the tragedy, because now we're putting real lives in our minds instead of, like, for lack of a better way of putting it, these cogs in the machine, right? These people that are all in uniforms and they have masks on and they have all this gear. They all kind of look the same. They do start to feel like cogs in the machine, even though we know these are people. And that's very well emphasized throughout the show. Like, these are people, human lives are at risk here. But using Lyudmilla is really good, because now we see them, her and her husband, starting their lives together and planning a future that's cut short in the most horrific way possible. That's so much more engaging on the emotional side, because it's hard to keep track of the husband due to his physical deterioration, but it's really easy to keep track of her. She has a very distinct look, right? And now we can identify with her and the pain of and horror of seeing her husband dying, because that's okay. Now we have something to connect with on a very simple level. But in episode 3, he dies, and that's brutal. They bury him right in this lead coffin covered in concrete. Like, it's just so. After that, how do you make it hurt again when we've been watching so much brutal human death? Right? We watched a woman lose her husband, buried in the worst way imaginable. You'll never find that guy again. Like, that's, and then how do you resensitize us? I tell you how. In episode 4, we start killing puppies and babies. And that's the kind of thing, as a writer, you don't want to do, but this is the story. And now if you're trying to make sure people are emotionally engaging with it, after you've rubbed their nerves off for 3 episodes, you need to tell them the other truths that are out there that will resensitize them to the tragedy. And that's a very low-hanging fruit, and I don't think exploitative at all. And other films, I would call
how
it.
they do that. Sorry, and how they do that is amazing. That one single shot tracking through the hospital, you see crying babies, and then you see an empty bassinet and her just sitting there staring off into nothing. You don't even see her face. That's it. That's all you've got to do. It's so understated and perfect. Like, you can write that, and it hurts to write, but you're totally right on that it's you have to go to that level, because that's what people dealt with and went through. But how you do it says a lot about the story that you're telling, and how they did it was fantastic. We're like, we've shown you so much gore and so much brutality. You don't need to see the baby going through that. You can see the mother going through the aftermath of that, because that's who we've been with. We haven't been with the baby. We haven't identified with the baby. It hasn't been, it's just been something that's been inside her, and now it's not, and it's gone. And that's all you need to show. Anyway, great point.
And then we start shooting dogs, which is interesting too, because we never actually see a dog die. The closest we get is see one dog shot, but he's still alive and breathing. And what I find interesting is we have a man's best friend, it just seems to be accurate, because we have a much worse reaction to watching animals killed, like dogs specifically, than we do of watching all these people die of radiation sickness. Like, that's wild. But we also start to engage with Pavel, right? He's the animal control kid that's new and taking on this thing that he's not trained for. He doesn't even know how to load a gun. And here he is. He's got to start killing animals left and right. And it's such a great sequence. I love the tension they set up with this guy, his boss. I didn't write his name down, but his leader, who's phenomenal. God, every actor in here is just crushing it. And he tells them, right, I have 2 rules. Don't point your gun at me. Don't let them suffer. Don't let them suffer. And he kind of leans back into him like, I will kill you. Like, okay. And the guy, he shoots the look to the guy, and the guy's like, yeah, he'll probably kill you. He's like, yeah, okay. It was like, good. And then
he's like the one piece of comic relief.
Right. It's very few and far between. What do you mean Russians are hilarious, Todd? And so, haven't you read Tolstoy? And so, they first thing they do is show this kid finally shooting a dog. And there's a couple of things that happen here. He shoots the dog, and when he goes to shoot the dog, we watch that happen from the doorway of a house, and we're pulling back into the house. And that's such a beautiful shot. It's such a simple idea that they're doing here is we are retreating inwards visually as we're watching him shoot. Normally, if someone's making their mind up to do a thing, you push into that. You watch the determination come over their face, right? And you dial in as they're dialing in. And instead, the exact opposite is happening. We're pulling away, not just pulling away, we're pulling into a house. And so it's the emotional reflection of what this kid is experiencing. He is retreating inwards as he's doing this thing. And it's such a simple, beautiful execution of an idea, of an emotion. Because what happens in the next scene, it's time to eat. It's lunchtime. He won't eat. And he doesn't speak. His boss is over there trying to talk to him and engage with him and tell him it's okay. Like, I've killed a lot of men. And just because your first time was a dog doesn't make you less of a man. Like, it's all the same to some degree or another. Taking life is never good. And it's just this beautiful thing. But the other thing is the tension that it sets up as he's walking after he shoots the dog, right? He walks up on him and he's trying to figure out, like, what do I do? And in the back of our mind, we saw a line get drawn in the sand, right? Like, your life is about to be forfeit, buddy. And then, of course, the very next person we see is the boss, and he's like, hey, gets in his face. But he's a human. He sees what this kid is going through, and he's like, boom, don't let them suffer. And he's like, okay, we're out. And then, of course, not long after that, like, how do you keep ramping up the stakes? Well, instead of a dog, how about a mother and her litter? Okay. Yeah. It's just, how can we twist the screw just a little bit more, into your innards, I guess.
But it's all the way that they do it. A lot of it could be unbelievable. And the way that they do it is so human. It just feels real. It feels like it really happened. And I really think that Craig Mazin did a lot of research about what actually happened, about what people actually had to do, about what people actually went through, and was a genius in crafting scenarios that would be believable. Not anything, I think it's so easy, probably, I don't know. I would imagine it'd be so easy as a writer to find the just the biggest, most unbelievable scenarios.
Right.
And throw those in there. Like, I feel like what Craig was doing was trying to find the most human scenarios, or at least take a scenario that even might have been like way worse. And how do I humanize this? How do I turn this into something that everyone can see and not necessarily relate to, but just be impacted by, even if that means that it's less gory. Or I show less, right? It's just, there's no need necessarily to show this kid having to learn how to kill dogs. But I guarantee that happened, whether it was a kid or not, who knows? Maybe he made it a kid and for us to feel that impact of this child now having to grow up real quick, and having to do something as difficult as that. It's some incredible writing on that front.
I completely agree. Like, to what degree some things are true is actually really interesting. If you haven't listened to the Chernobyl podcast, he goes on.
Right. That's right. I forgot about that.
It's so incredible because he'll start telling you things like, at times I had to actually tamp it down.
Oh, okay. See? All right.
Yeah. I had to play it down just because at a certain point you just start to, really? And it's like, actually, it was way worse than that. I needed to make sure I could bring the audience along, or else you just lose the suspension of disbelief by telling the truth sometimes.
I have so much respect for a writer in that regard. Like in today's society, like I feel like worse is always, if we can make it worse, if we can make it gorier, if we can make it more aggressive, if we can make it more stimulating, you got to do that. To have the foresight and the respect for the audience and the respect for the craft to say, no, I need to tell this story, stay in this lane, do these things, keep the feel like this. And even if that means, pulling it back a little bit, wow, what respect you got to have for a writer like that.
Absolutely. And the way I think he structured this whole thing was just brilliant. Whenever you're dealing with, an event like this, I think in my mind anyway, there's two ways you can approach it. Start with the event or end with the event. You can build up to it, right? The Titanic builds up to it.
Great point.
Or you can start with it and then discuss the aftermath. And this started with it. It kind of did both to some degree. And it was just brilliant, but starting us after the explosion. And that's the interesting thing is we don't actually see well, we do. That's like the first thing we see from the window pane of, Lyudmilla and her husband. And then he's got to go fight the fire. But we don't really know what happened until the end. But starting us right after the explosion puts us in really great suspense that would be lessened, I think, with starting with the run-up of the test. And I think that's the interesting thing, is holding the run-up of the test itself until afterwards. It adds so much more tension when we finally do start seeing the test in that 5th episode, because now we're anticipating the explosion. And after seeing all the damage that comes after, right, we're imagining and we're almost screaming at the person to not go through that door, right? Like, guys, no, and it just kicks in this other layer of disbelief about everything you just watched, especially if you were to kind of stitch those two scenes together of the episode 1 and episode 5, because in episode 1, you're seeing everyone's reaction to the core is exposed. And he's like, there's no way. Whereas if you were to see that run up, you would certainly hate Dyatlov even more, but you almost wouldn't buy into the reality of what actually happened in that room. It's just so unbelievable. It's just the amount of hubris at play is I can't even fathom it. But so it is sometimes with the wrong people with the wrong amount of knowledge, because he was under the impression he knew everything and he didn't. And right, the best scientists never assume they know everything, but they do work with what they have, the information they have, and then they shape all of that based on new data. And that guy got a bunch of new data and he said, no, we're good.
Well, and unfortunately, like it was such a perfect storm of all this stuff, because as they call out in the show, this had they knew this. The government knew that this type of thing could have happened, but they did nothing about it. And so Dyatlov didn't necessarily have that information, but he had all the surrounding information, and he ignored it. And he even had, I'm not sure if that actually happened, but he had the guy with the glasses saying, we've got to shut down. And then he would yell at him, no, don't. So yeah, he had all the information he needed and just drove forward, into oblivion, I guess.
Yeah. It's the other poison well, is ambition, right? This guy was just trying to think about how to get ahead. And, he always thought in the back of his mind, he had this fail safe, that of course became the detonator. But there's so many threats throughout the show. I mean, obviously there's threats from radiation, but the other threat is of course from authority and government. And that's what Dyatlov was really wielding. There's this threat of violence that underpins every authority figure's commands. Right? You have Boris even in the helicopter where he's trying to get Legasov to tell him how a nuclear reactor works, right? And he's like, you wouldn't understand. He's like, tell me or I'll have one of these men throw you out of the helicopter. And Legasov takes a moment to look at these guys and all right, well, here's how it operates. And then afterwards, right, he tells them, great, now I know how a nuclear reactor works. I don't need you anymore. And it's just this very not so subtle threat to stay in line, or guess what happens, right? But throughout the whole film or the show, everything's like that. Between that and even Ulana, says as much when she's talking to Dyatlov and trying to get him to give her the information that she's looking for. She tells him, I'm your best chance to avoid a bullet. And so throughout the entire show, in just general knowledge of this era of Russian politics, and I mean, probably still ongoing is my impression. I don't know anything in particular. But there's always this threat of violence from the authority figures. And so throughout the show too, everyone's guard is always up. Everyone's afraid of making a slip. And so sometimes you're looking at someone who looks like an authority figure, but is really just covering their own ass. When Ulana is trying to check out all these books or reports or whatever, she makes that list and she hands it to the woman, and the woman hands it to her boss. And this guy marks off almost all of them except one. And then she's going to get that book, and Ulana is looking at the boss, and he's neutral. Part of him, you can read his expression however you want. It's neutral. It's, seeing into her soul. It's guarded. It's all those things, because for his perspective, maybe he doesn't know if that's a test. Like maybe he's being tested right now, and he's got to toe the company line. Like all that subversive ideology is always at play with every character on every level. Probably even Gorbachev is over there looking at how to cover his own back because he doesn't know if the men in his room are ambitious. All right. All of it's bad. All of it's poison. But this makes hunting for the truth so much more meaningful, right? The stakes are so much higher to just ask questions. Not even getting to publicly declaring anything that goes against leadership. That's certain death, right? And so you just don't know when the consequence is going to be born. And that's just an ever-present cloud hanging over everyone. But along the way, from the beginning, all dissent is ridiculed and berated. Like at no point does anyone say, boss, you're wrong. Why, thank you. Let's improve ourselves. like that's not the attitude. It's like, you're an idiot. Do your job. What did you do? He's giving people commands, and when they do them, it's their fault, right? Yeah. It's just the worst boss constantly. Every boss is the worst boss. Except for, and it develops, is Valery and Boris's relationship throughout the show, and then they have that amazing scene in the middle of the recess of the trial, where Valery walks up to Boris, and Boris just thinks that he's wasted his life and he's nothing, and Valery says, "Actually, you're the hero. I have the knowledge, but without the action, without someone to get me everything I needed, that it would never have happened. You actually did this." And I think it's also, it's for us too, as I felt like it was for me as a viewer, of saying how important Boris was, Stellan Skarsgard's character, how important he was to this story, because at first he's a bad guy. At first he's like I don't believe you, Valery, you're full of shit, and I know more than you. And he's part of the establishment. He's part of the USSR. And then they become friends, and they learn from each other. And I think Boris learns how to navigate the governmental side a lot more from Valery, and Valery learns how to listen better, and to be a student instead of just thinking that he knows everything because he has the title, like they just become good friends. You inverted those. Did I? Oh yeah. Sorry. I inverted those. You know what I mean? Yeah. You know what I mean? Boris learns from Valery how to be, a student, and I think you're absolutely right. Like their relationship dynamic is so good. And it starts with the phone call, actually, in episode 1, at the end of the episode, right? Boris calls Legasov, and Legasov is on the phone trying to raise concerns immediately about potential radiation levels. As he's just learning about the whole situation, he's already thinking like, oh crap, well, we should be aware of like if radiation levels, and what happens, Boris cuts him off immediately, right? His authoritarian mentality ultimately may have cost him his life, because if he had listened at that point, maybe he's not the man on the ground. Now, maybe that turns out worse for everyone. But his unwillingness to even listen from the get-go could be culpable on his part about what actually happens for him in his life. But they go into that meeting, and he gets embarrassed, right, in front of Gorbachev, as Valery, pauses everyone. The meeting's being adjourned, and he's like, no. And he's like, what? Sorry. Not good. Graphite on the ground. And then he starts losing his mind. And finally, he convinces everyone to take this seriously. But then to go back to what you were talking about, the trial, they have that moment, and it's such a good moment. And he's just talking about how impossible, like, the whole apparatus is of Leviathan. That's kind of the term people use about the Russian government as this like thing that strangles and chokes and extends into everywhere. It just gets everywhere. And he tells Boris, Legasov tells Boris, they accidentally sent the best man. This is paraphrased, but you were the only one everyone listened to, as you were just saying, right? And so what happens right after that, they go back into the trial. And once again, it's a beautiful inversion of that first scene in front of Gorbachev, because now they're in the trial and everyone's trying to leave before they get to the truth. And that's finally when Boris does stand up. He does what Gorbachev did. He stands up and he says, let him speak, right? And it's just this beautiful completion of their relationship, to underscore everything you said, because their relationship, it develops. And I think you're right about Legasov learning a bit more about how to manage or deal with leadership.
Deal with.
But he also can't. He also can't help himself. He knows what he knows. And so I think the other thing that jumps out to me cinematography wise, the whole show is like a lot of slow camera moves. It's very patient, and it just kind of grounds you a lot, and gives you an opportunity to see everything that's going on. But the opening, I thought, was just really interesting, because it opens on Legasov in his apartment about to kill himself. And the background, the atmosphere is very green. All the lighting is very, very green. But he himself is kind of lit purplish. And it just feels, everything in that room feels radioactive and diseased on a pure visual level. And it's nice. I guess tuning into Chernobyl, you want that opening scene to feel like the result of something that we've experienced, especially when you're starting at the end like this. And then the other thing that caught my eye cinematography wise, is Lyudmilla, whenever she finally gets to the hospital in Moscow and she hugs her husband, right? There's that slow motion thing that kicks in. We go handheld, we're spinning around them a little bit, and then they start lens flaring, right? To denote the radiation poisoning. Right. And we know off the look that she gave that nurse that she is pregnant. She just lied about being pregnant. And that's a simple, we have a quick denial, maybe a little too fast. Me think, the lady doth protest too much kind of thing. And then we hold on her as she gets this worried look on her face. And then we just implicitly know she freaking is pregnant. You just don't do it. And that kicks in all the other things we were talking about, the tension and dramatic irony. And that flaring, though, is really interesting. My impression is that it's probably done in post. I don't know that. Maybe they just had really, really good lenses that, because one of the things is I don't know where that flaring source would be coming from within the room. Now, it's not to say you can't set it up off camera, but the way the camera just kind of keeps spinning around, it feels a little too loose. but that's also why you rehearse and block and all that stuff. But the timing also seems really intentional with the edit. But the camera covers so much ground. I don't know. But the thing that really makes me think that this is a post effect is I'm not seeing any smearing on the lens. So if you ever see like a matte box around the lens or a lens hood, that kind of puts up this black barrier in front of the lens, that's to prevent flaring happening. Because if you want flaring, you want to be intentional about it. Because if you don't want flaring and you get flaring, what's happening is your lens is getting smeared with light and it's reducing the contrast of your image. And it makes things not pop as strongly as you want them to. There's a simple test you can always do where you go outside, right? And you shoot into the sun, maybe not directly at the sun, but like shoot someone or a landscape with the sun kind of flaring in the edge of the frame. And then shoot that same shot again, except block out the sun with your hand and just look at the before and after of that image. And you're going to be like, oh, wow, the light is smearing your lens, and it's just, completely degrading all the textures and subtleties that you're trying to capture, because that's all your camera's doing, right? It's just capturing light. And so the cleaner you can make that light coming from the objects that you want to capture, the better, because now you're just getting a straight capture of the light reflecting off those objects. Whereas if you introduce a new light that you don't want to capture, all that other light is being disrupted. And now it's just getting smeared around in ways that you may not find desirable. And so I don't know if maybe that's just badass lens or some kind of coating on their lens. I don't know. That gets a little bit beyond my technical knowledge of how some lenses are constructed, because there's a lot of different ways to coat and set up your lens. But my impression is they did it in post, which is kind of an interesting thing to me. If so, just because they have all the budget in the world, like they could have done that. But I think to do all the best things, keep on schedule, get the timing, get the look just right that you want. Maybe it's just quicker and easier, and gives you the polish that you want, as well as retaining the quality of your image. Again, the smearing could degrade their image. And so I would imagine they did it in post for all those reasons. Great amount of control that you can just do in post instead. But it's just rare, I feel like, to see that in a high quality production. Like you go watch Star Trek, right? The J.J. Abrams reboot, and you're flaring all over. In fact, they had to go and remove flares because it was just too much. But you can see.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
He felt like maybe he went overboard that time. So my last couple of thoughts, maybe, I don't know. I have so many other notes. I
know, man. We could talk about this for a long time.
But the simple stuff, there's some there's some effects that I just thought are really, really cool, for lack of a better term. For one, the era and the setting provide so much visual drama, right? The radiation suits, the uniforms, the cleaning materials themselves, the building architecture and the set designs, the props, lean into it. Like you don't really need to add too much extra visual drama if you don't want to, because it's all provided through being in the 80s in Russia at a nuclear plant, having a meltdown. Like what more do you actually need? Just do the normal stuff, use the wardrobe. But then whenever you do want to add some flair, then there's a lot of opportunity. And one of my favorite things they did that is just gut wrenching is this gag and this is what you call it a gag. Gags I know we use as like comedy. On set, you say gag to denote some kind of physical special effect or some prop element, or it covers a lot of ground. Gag covers a lot of ground in production. And so in this case, I'm talking about there's a bleeding gag in the first episode as that guy is walking out of the chamber, the reactor core, right? And he starts bleeding through his lab coat. And it's just amazing. It's so awful to see. But it's beautiful. Like he stops, right? You pause. We're going to really emphasize what's happening here by letting him stop. He's going to look down to direct our attention down. What is he looking at? Oh, he's looking at his uniform. And then we're just going to let blood seep through the white lab coat. Like the props created this potential. And they just got every ounce of disgusting out of it. Because if your heart doesn't drop, you're just not watching the show. I don't know what to say, but that was just a beautiful gag there. How was your reaction to that, Todd?
I mean, yeah, I think the biggest part of it was the biggest thing that I got from it was the immediacy of it, right? Because, you know, we had already had, I think at that point, we had the guy who picked up the graphite, and then his hand, you know, is burned or whatever. But he picked it up, we cut away, stuff happened, and then we see him on the ground screaming like a little while later. This was almost instantaneous. I mean, he's holding the door open, they go in, we come back, he lets the door go, and we see him bleeding already. And so it's just, I don't know, it just showed me how immediate this really is, and how it's not just the graphite, it's also the building itself that is radioactive. And if you touch anything or just in there, I think what it did for me was it taught me that all of these people will die very soon. You know, whether they get out of the building or not, it doesn't matter. They are all dead. And so from that point on, everybody that I saw, I just see as they're all dead now because of this. So everybody I see on screen is dead. That one scene, that one moment of seeing him bleed through that, like, made me think, oh, everyone's going to die. So yeah, it was pretty intense.
Oh,
yeah.
The other simple thing they did, and you are forced to use it, don't get me wrong, but they leaned into it so wonderfully, which is the radiation detectors have such a specific noise. We understand what it means when we hear it on a visceral level. It's just sickening. It's absolute, you know, and so ending an episode like that, maximizing your tension and you know, your pull on the audience, just use it. Like it's, the other thing was there was an awful lot of smoking throughout the film, and maybe someone should warn them about that. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But they do kind of like linger on a lot of cigarette shots, the ashtrays. And I think there is this also implied element of poisoning ourselves, right? Cancer, because radiation and cancer go hand in hand. And using cigarettes as another shorthand of cancer. You know, whenever we're watching some of these characters smoke, we're immediately thinking about cancer in their life, being terminated early. And so it's a very simple, easy visual cue, as well as, I mean, in this era, everyone was smoking, and it just visually helps, you know, keep your characters active and doing things, and is in some ways simple little character dramas, right? You have the miner, right, that goes into the office and he grabs a cigarette, and you're just through smoking, he's able to demonstrate his confidence and his swagger and how much he really doesn't care about these guys. Like, he is his own person. He's going to do what he thinks is best for his men. And you can, you know, subtly communicate a lot of these things just through something as simple as smoking. Yeah. Props do a lot for you. Yeah, I don't know, man. I literally have a whole other page of notes that I didn't throw into my collection. But all good. I think we can call it there. What final thoughts? Let me do that instead.
I mean, it's perfectly made. I wouldn't change anything. I was watching it trying to think, okay, what would I do different? I thought that the camera moves were fantastic. Great point about the that one shot of pulling back on the kid as he was shooting the dog. And I thought the camera work was fantastic. I thought the acting was otherworldly. I thought the writing was wonderful in so many ways. And I felt the weight of every decision or non-decision in this show, and it was just masterfully executed. I really think that, like, I just wish that, I'm just going to call them out. I just wish that Netflix would take notes from something like this, because, like, look, I go on Netflix like everybody else, and I look for new things being released, and I look and see what they're making and all that stuff. But nowhere in any corner of their catalog do they have anything even close to something like this. And I think that HBO has other things that are close to it. I mean, I don't think anything is close to Chernobyl. I think it's like just the best.
It's singular, yeah.
But just the production value and the way that it's executed, and the level of detail and editing. That's one thing we didn't talk about, is the editing of this, right? Like, I think it was probably shot for the edit. It feels like it was shot for the edit.
Agreed.
But which, for people who might not know, that's you're shooting exactly what you're trying to, what you're getting in the edit, with what you're shooting, instead of shooting and then hoping that the edit will pull it out.
Right. Or just because the normal way a lot of productions work is we'll get coverage. And to Todd's point, you work it out and just hope that all of that pays off. And maybe you get 1 or 2 specialty shots for a scene. Like, we're going to get this moment, but otherwise you just get your wide, get your master, get your mediums, get your close-ups, and then we're out. Like, yeah, okay.
Yeah. And so anyway, I don't pretend to know the difference between making a Chernobyl and making some, like, an HBO Max version and making a Netflix version. Like, what would it look like if Netflix made this? Nothing like this. It would be nothing like it. And so whatever the difference is, they need to figure that out, because this is what is timeless.
Yeah.
This thing is just timeless. In 30 years, I will watch this and be like, that is incredible. It's just incredible. I can already tell you that now. And I just think that needs to be celebrated. It's absolutely amazing.
Completely agree. 2 thoughts and responses to that. On the one hand,
please.
I agree. And I don't think it's necessarily a fault of the quality of source material, which for some people might be the difference, right? If you don't have a Craig Mazin writing a Chernobyl, then how can you make it, right? But I don't think that's the problem. They've clearly had some really talented, maybe as close as they've gotten has been something like Queen's Gambit or something like that. But this is operating on a whole other level. But they do have the quality, because I'm also looking at their upcoming release of 3 Body Problem. I've read those books.
Oh, yeah.
Those are incredible books. And yet I'm worried about that production on every facet. And so I'm rooting for it, because I really want that to be good. But I am holding that same, like, paused breath of, I don't know if you guys are figuring it out over there, or you're just getting productions done. Those are 2 different things. And my second thought is, I also worry a little bit about the industry at whole, because they're part of the I don't understand necessarily what the WGA is going for in some of their demands. One of the things that they want is a minimum amount of writers in a writer's room. And so for something like Chernobyl, I'm wondering how what they're wanting would impact something like a Chernobyl that was created and written by one person. Like, you had one writer in that room, and if he'd been forced to hire 4 other writers, does that still apply? Is what they're wanting still going to apply, or are they making some leeway for, like, a single writer's room? I don't know. I haven't seen that answered anywhere yet. But that's what I'm hoping for, because there are some shows that wouldn't be what they are with too many voices in the room. I'm thinking something like The White Lotus, along with Chernobyl, and I'm sure a handful of others if I sat and thought. But hopefully there's, some leeway there. And because every once in a while, like, I wouldn't say this is, I understand why they want what they want, because that's being really abused by the system right now. Whenever you hire a few writers for a few weeks to knock out a show Bible, and then you go and prep everything, and then you hire some other writers for a few more weeks to crank out the scripts, and now you've gotten away with not having to pay, 5 writers for 6 months. And instead you paid, 8 writers for 10 weeks. And it's like, oh, hey, we just, shivved a bunch of writers in order to make the show work. But that's a whole other, there's a big conversation that they're having right now about the future of the industry and streaming, how that fits in, or how the old way fits into this new way. I don't know. I'm rooting for the WGA to get what they want. I know that because the studios have been really myopic. But anyway, yeah. So those are my wanderings, and certainly not my solutions.
I gotcha.
Yeah,
I love it.
Nice. Okay. Well, what are you going to recommend this week, man?
I gotta go lighter on the front here. I'm gonna go with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. We haven't reco'd that yet, so nice. It's, I think I went into it with very low expectations, and I thought that a lot of it was fun and beautiful story for Rocket, and yeah, really enjoyed it. So, gonna go light.
Nice. I'm going to lean the other direction. I'm going to recommend.
I knew you would. That's why I went light. I knew you would.
I'm going to recommend a book. It's called Truck Stop Rainbows. It's by Ihre Pekárková, probably, and it's a book written. I forget. I haven't read this in a while. It takes place in Eastern Europe, I want to say under the USSR, but even that might not be completely accurate. And
sorry, I just
okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure you weren't giving me a hint about something.
No, you're good.
And it's about life under those kind of conditions, under a socialist or communist regime, and what it means to you as someone trying to get an education and dealing with the medical system. And it's just really fascinating because it's written, very honestly, and it's exploring like her sexual life as and how it turns based on her needs. And it's brutal, it's unflinching, and in a lot of ways it's also beautiful, and it's really well written. Yeah. And so if you want to kind of explore, I want to say it takes place in what was Czechoslovakia. There is no longer a Czechoslovakia. Now we have Slovakia and the Czech Republic. But I want to say it takes place in Czechoslovakia before the disintegration or the separate or whatever. And if not, apologies. I haven't read it in several years, but yeah, I think that's worth reading if you want some additional perspective about, I don't know, Eastern Europe. And so, yeah, stay tuned for next week. We lighten the load a little bit, and have, some sci-fi fun with Source Code. We'll see Jake Gyllenhaal. I don't know, not let a train explode or something. I forget the details, right?
Pretty sure it explodes a lot.
Oh, or the exact opposite.
Or the exact opposite. Yeah.
And so
awesome.
take a view on that. I don't know if it's streaming somewhere. It's probably, a couple bucks on some platform or another if you haven't already seen it. And yeah, if you're enjoying the show, don't forget, drop us a review, subscribe. Todd, we make millions off this show. Everyone knows we make millions off the show. And at this point, we've gotten too many millions. What we really want now, just drop us a little 5-star review, and
okay. We just want to give back.
It's time. It's time for us.
Got it.
Yeah. And if you want to comment on this episode in particular, you can do that at thepestlepodcast.com/Chernobyl.
And our quote of the day is from Marie Curie. I'm one of those who think, like Nobel, that humanity will draw more good than evil from new discoveries. I agree. However, hopefully the evil part isn't the part that destroys us, right. No matter how small, right? All it takes is one really, really evil dude. We know that.
We do.
We've seen it in history.
And just the wrong person in command, right? Like even if Dyatlov wasn't necessarily evil, he was certainly full of himself, full of pride, and just having the wrong guy evil or not, right? It's like, but then make them evil on top of that. Oh yeah, you're in for it. But that's kind of the interesting thing. Just Oppenheimer, and now we're talking about Chernobyl. There's a temptation, I think, for people to go back into this China syndrome mentality of nuclear's bad. And my hope and my
so glad you called that out.
Right. Like, and my hope and my belief is that watching something like Chernobyl doesn't turn you off entirely from nuclear energy, because if we're trying to solve climate change, I think it's way harder, nearing impossible, if you don't include nuclear energy in that discussion. And so what I'm hoping watching something like Chernobyl does is instead encourage you to be, diligent, and take this seriously and respectful about this kind of technology, because they could have taken down a continent, or worse, I don't know. But as we move forward and hopefully, it just sucks because that whole China syndrome thing really set us back. Probably. I mean, I guess you could run history like Doctor Strange and look at all the possible outcomes and say, actually, it inadvertently saved us, a lot. But at this point, hopefully, we can responsibly think about nuclear and how to use it, and instead use this as a learning experience instead of as an ultimatum that you can't do that or else everything dies. Because right now we are dealing with some serious stuff, and if we don't look at something as powerful and clean as nuclear, we're going to have to account for that too.
Yeah. I mean, it's actually very safe, and it's like very effective. I mean, nuclear it just got a bad rap because when it went bad, like Chernobyl, it went real bad, but the point is, it's like, there have been things put into place where something like that more than likely would not ever happen again. And it's a clean energy and everything. But what the funny thing is that if you look at it from a, 10,000 foot view, it's just a goddamn steam engine.
Right.
That's all it is. It's just a steam engine. How is it we're in 2023 and we're still fucking trying to make steam engines? Just a new version of a steam engine. Like, he's explaining it in the final episode, and I'm thinking, wait a minute. It just makes steam? I mean, he explains it earlier, but it just makes steam. The whole point of like fission is to make steam. We can't think of some better way to use fission than to boil water?
Turbines, more turbines. That blew my mind. I was working on a project a couple years ago, talking about a reservoir and an energy dam. And as I was getting into it, I was like, oh, so at the heart of this, it's just trying to make turbines spin. That's not what I thought was going on in there. It always sounds so much more technical and advanced. And now watching Chernobyl, you're like, yeah, we are still just dealing with steam. Like, what? Did you get into it all the race with the room temperature superconductor over the last like month or two?
Yeah.
Like, that was super fascinating, because whenever you start inventing things like that, a material that can operate as a superconductor at room temperature, unpressurized, a whole world of possibility opens. And one of those things is the ability to transport energy losslessly over great distances. That's one of our problems right now. It's why people got really upset about Texas not being a part of the power grid or whatnot. And to some degree, sure, but we're also a really big state. And so degradation is going to happen if you're trying to get, power from whatever, Oklahoma, down to Austin or Brownsville or something. Like, there's only so many miles you can run electricity over a power line before it degrades into nothing. But with a room temperature superconductor, suddenly, like, you can retain all that, and a number of other ways and so to your point, like, we're still messing with steam, and we haven't figured out whatever this next big jump is. When it happens, it's going to make, you know, it's going to make us look like we've been living on steamboats. And then,
I mean, we have been. It's crazy to me to think that that's currently what we're doing.
Yeah.
Currently, that is our nuclear technology, is just, we're trying to make heat in a way, we're trying to put less energy into making heat to make steam.
crazy.
That's it. It blows my mind, but that's where we're at, you know? I'd like to think that there was some other way, but it's just hilarious to me that was it. I was like, what the hell? Are we in the 1800s? Why is this still a thing? We're in 2023, but all right.
Pretty much. And just for the record, that room temperature superconductor did not work out. That was debunked. As it goes with magical breakthrough technologies all too often. But yeah, that's kind of my hope, man, is because I agree with everything you're saying. Like, nuclear really is very, very safe. Even if you're looking at something like Fukushima, what killed people was the explosion. Yeah. And the storm and the escaping of the area. Like, radiation, I think, finally ended up killing one person, I think is the total. I'll double check that and add it to the show notes. But worst case scenarios certainly exist, and that's where, responsibility, but we also need to find a way to make it a little bit quicker getting these things, out. Because if you just bury them in red tape, it's going to make reaching climate goals that much harder. And so use Chernobyl as a guidepost, but not as like a stop sign, is my hope for the world. I'm glad it exists. Yeah.
I agree. Great. I had a great time talking about this, as difficult as it was. It's just such an amazing piece of art to watch. So thank you, Craig, for writing this, and HBO for making it. We hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you liked it, please share us with your friends, subscribe, review us. All that stuff really helps a lot, and we love hearing it. We really do. It means a lot to us. So until next week, I'm Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies.
3.6. Not great, not terrible.